it may just be a small part of GDP, but there's this little layer that is underneath every other part of activity, every other activity in the economy. That layer is all important, because without that, everything else
It's the bottom
gone.
Jenga block, isn't it?
It's the bottom Jenga, exactly.
Yeah, you pull that out.
It's the foundations, and it all goes. And it turns out, actually, when you look at the foundations, because no one's been focusing much on this stuff, because we're all in the ethereal world, it turns out there's just loads of interesting stories that have been kind of untapped for a long time. So that's the ethereal world.
You focus on six. You focus on 6 materials. They are. Well, you can say what they are.
Okay, all right. Sand, salt, iron, copper, oil, and lithium.
Yeah. Why those 6?
Well, they're not. It's not a definitive list. There are other materials maybe available, but it's just a good starting point to start thinking about. Okay, this physical world around us, how does it actually come about? Where does the glass come from? Where do the silicon chips come from? Where does the concrete that's kind of underneath the literal foundations of our world, where does it actually come from? And a lot of that, that's sand. Sand that goes into glass. You melt down sand and you get glass, particular types of sand. You've got to have the right sand. You put the right kind of sand into a mix with a few other materials and you have concrete and cement. You get a particular type of silicon, so it's kind of called quartzite. Technically not a sand, but it could be a sand in chemical terms. And you melt that down and go through an incredibly kind of detailed process, and you end up with silicon chips. So each of these things allows you to kind of tell the story both of the history of the physical world around us, but then also, you've noticed 2 of the materials are oil and lithium. So, oil, that's part of the big fossil fuel story of our age today. I mean, pretty much every product we touch on a daily basis will have some kind of connection with petrochemicals, like it or not. The world is still run to some extent on oil and gas. We still, when we're eating most of the food, like 90% of the food in the world is fertilized with fertilizers that come from gas. So we are quite literally actually consuming fossil fuels on a daily basis. But because we're not spending that much time thinking about how does this world actually come into place, I think we're slightly deluded as to the extent to which we're reliant on this stuff. And so really the point of, why those 6, for a book, it just gives you a kind of this arc to be able to tell that story about the world that we inhabit. But like I say, I agonized over which things to include, because there are loads of other things that are really important, titanium, aluminium. I wondered about whether should I include cobalt rather than lithium for the battery chapter, because obviously the mining of cobalt, as you'll probably have seen, a lot of that happens in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The conditions are pretty abysmal.
Seriously bad condition, wars and child labour and all sorts of things.
Yeah, and actually there are very few materials which are quite so concentrated into one place.
You call it like truly unique place.
Yeah,
exactly. most minerals are spread around. They have everything essentially.
So I kind of thought maybe that's the story. As a journalist, I'm a journalist. I kind of thought, well, that sounds like the obvious kind of compelling story, because it's like it's there in one place, everyone's reliant on it. But I had to decide between that and lithium. And actually, the interesting thing about cobalt is, for all of that tragedy and for all of what's happening in the DRC, we are getting a lot better at making batteries without cobalt. So we still have them, in your iPads and your mobile phones and everything else. But in a lot of electric cars these days, like the Tesla Model 3, the kind of low range, at least Tesla Model 3, that's got a type of battery that doesn't have any cobalt at all in it. And so over time, there are these amazing advances that are happening. But again, the kind of the lesson of the material world is, because so much of it is happening beneath the surface of the items that we use, and because not many kind of companies or people are talking about the wonder of what's going on inside, I just feel like so much of it is hidden. Like batteries, okay, for instance. Do you know that they literally kind of expand and contract as you're charging them and using them?
13% was it, or something?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
you said in the book.
They're moving, and like you think about this.
Your phone's going like this. It's like pulsing.
It's mental, isn't it? And that is happening there. There's this life beneath the kind of surfaces of all the items we're using. And some of it's like the complex items, but so like technology. But some of it's just simple stuff like concrete. Concrete is still, right now, it's the most boring material in the world, supposedly. But all that concrete out there in the city, it is still kind of inhaling concrete is inhaling some of the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and using that to cure itself, to get kind of harder. So there's this living world around us, hidden within the seemingly boring material objects that we don't spend much time thinking about. And the more you kind of probe, the more of those stories there are, it turns out.
That was a clip from our full-length conversation with Sky News economics editor Ed Conway, and you can watch the full episode right here.